Senses pulled from clay. Summer, spring within a day. Wide sky, bench, train tracks. Short poem.
Short poem.
Haiku.
Haiku. It was very sporadic, and I was trying to put a name to the sporadic nature of it, but haiku.
Well, I was trying to really condense things into, 17 syllables.
Yeah.
Because today's episode can't really be condensed at all.
It can't. I will be surprised if it condenses into an episode. Today's episode topic is making, which is essentially all that Aaron and I talk about for the 6 years of our relationship, some would say. So we're going to try and condense it into an episode, and I am beyond excited for this conversation.
Did you recognize the poem that I was talking about? Wide sky, bench, train tracks?
No.
That's my favorite place.
Oh, I thought you said the poem you were referencing.
No, I mean the place.
Yes, your favorite place. Behind my house, on the trail.
Thought it would be a nice image to start off with. So it's this nice trail where it's always summer. It's never winter. Because I've only been there really in the summer for large periods of time. And you sit on this bench and there's this train track carrying just beautiful mounds of coal. And it's just, I don't know why, I'm always very inspired to write there. It feels like a very poetic spot. I think it's because it's so open. This, you can see the horizon.
Yes.
It's just somewhat rare.
It's true. We wanted to structure this episode with questions.
Yeah.
So should we share the questions with the audience?
Okay, so the first one is, how does making help us grow as non-economic beings? And what were your thoughts on that, Alicia?
Making is often economic. What we do for work is making, even if you're in the service industry, you are creating some kind of an experience or some kind of a product with your time that is then being sold for money.
Yep.
And so it's hard to separate our economic life with our creative life. But to answer the question, I thought about ways that I make just in everyday life and things that I do for hobbies, not for money. And the first thing that I thought of was that it's kind of non-economic entertainment. When you bake or when you write or sew, you're not contributing to the economy, but you're also not paying for a Netflix subscription or paying to go out to a cafe or paying someone else to entertain you. You are entertaining yourself, which I feel like we don't do that much.
It's definitely a non-profitable means of entertainment. Sometimes you have to buy ingredients,
it's true,
paints, etc. One of the reasons, off topic, but one of the reasons I love writing is because it's just free. Even if you don't have paper, you can just do it in your head.
It's true.
So that's, I think, one of the first things that appealed to me with it. But I agree, it's a way to spend time that isn't about
making money or giving money.
That was also my first observation about it, which is part of the beauty of creativity is when it's just for you. Like you said, baking, not to sell the brownies, to eat them, but also not even just to eat them, because what I like about making, I mean, that sounds kind of like we're deliberately using that word. It sounds kind of pretentious, but creation sounds maybe even more self-aggrandizing. So making is what we went with. It's like a kind of performance art in that it's not just that you're painting a canvas or filling the brownie tray. It's that you're painting the 2 hours of time while you're painting, if that makes sense. So you're painting the time. The time is the real art.
Yeah.
Time's the only resource.
It is the only resource. When you make music, you're painting the air, painting the sound waves of those few hours, and maybe irritating your roommates, but you're still creating something. The next thing that I thought is kind of a bit more practical about making is that it encourages self-reliance and resistance to the economic system. So if you know how to sew your own clothes and the clothing industry collapses, you're not going to be left out to dry. Like, you have an idea of how you could mend your things, how you could help out your friends, and that goes for almost all creative pursuits.
That's right. I really like the way you said that as well, because at first I thought you were going to say it gives you more independence from the economy or from the whims of the economy because you can create your own side hustle and things like that. But I like that you mentioned its independence in a different way, which is if things collapse, which a lot of people think they might.
Yeah.
I mean, we already see it with like supply chains and stuff. You're not completely incompetent because you can't buy frozen meals or something. You can actually cook.
Yeah. And I think also the side hustle thing is true to an extent. However, so many of us who have podcasts or people who have blogs or even are selling products, they're relying on Instagram and they're relying on the internet working in order to sell and market their products, which isn't a bad thing, but that just is the case. So if Meta decides to pull Facebook from the UK or whichever country that was, those people are going to be in a really tough situation.
That's true.
Yeah, which I'm like, is now a new fear of mine. I love when fears are added to my list of things where I'm like, what if the podcast just dissolved? Anyway, that's an existential moment for another
I think
day.
we'd still find a way to get it out there. It would be kind of like this underground radio station. People would have to tune in and we'd be like, we'd have code names.
Mm-hmm.
My thoughts on the side hustle culture are that it can be good because I can imagine it would be very empowering for a lot of people.
Mm-hmm.
But also I don't like the fact that it's almost a requirement in today's world,
Mm-hmm.
which leads everyone to be constantly seeking to try and optimize their interests and every ounce of efficiency and profit they can squeeze out of their creative endeavors.
Yeah, optimization. I've never thought of it like that, but we really feel that pressure, don't we?
Yeah, we do. I mean, Solacene is in a way a kind of side hustle. And when it comes to trying to grow, even though part of the message of Solacene is anti-social media, we unfortunately are kind of funneled into social media to try and gain listeners.
Yeah, there isn't really an alternative form of marketing anymore.
But what I was going to say is that there's always this tension between the things that we would like to post and perhaps the things that's like, oh, but that's not going to get anywhere.
Yeah, because we could make our Pedal and Dozer comic strip things that you have been planning.
Yeah, the listeners don't know what that is, so you have to explain it.
So Aaron created these characters. We had this night where we created these little clay figurines, and we were going to make stop motion stories with them.
Yeah.
However, we realized that would take a lot of time and effort, and we may post it and it not do anything for the podcast.
Yeah, I think most likely.
And we'd be content with that, but also we would like the podcast to grow so that we can therefore give more time to it and the cycle will continue. Then we can invite people in, guests.
Yeah, I don't even think like, the podcast's a good example, but there are people whose side hustle is their main hustle. I'm talking about like photographers. There's a lot of photographers who, because of their profession, have to be posting and taking photos that they don't really care about. And I don't blame them for that because that's just the way it is, but it kind of sucks. And there is always this thought in the back of my head that it's better to decorate the time, as we mentioned, than to decorate your wallet. So it's like, for us, we could spend the 2 hours decorating our time with our claymation figurines and it would be very fun. And maybe that should be all that matters.
Yeah.
We could probably talk for a long time about the difficulties of trying to market on social media despite not being fans of social media. But I wanted to mention that I started a blog.
Yes.
So I'm doing a plug 8 minutes in, which is maybe a record for us.
It might be record breaking. Yeah.
If you want to ask me the name of it, I don't remember, which is kind of amateurish of me. But there will be a link in the description, and it's where I post poems that I write, stories that I wrote. It's mostly fictional like that, but there's probably going to be some like reviews, book reviews, probably podcast reviews.
Film reviews.
Yeah, maybe movie reviews.
Yeah.
And I'm thinking just podcast announcements where I talk. It'll be like The Talking Dead, which was a show that aired, I think, every night after The Walking Dead, discussing the episode. I think that would be fun to do for the podcast. So if you're interested in that, check it out.
Yeah, Aaron is an incredible writer. This is one thing that he loves to do and has done since I've met him, just writing random novels and short stories, poems here and there. So he's put a lot of effort into it. So you're not going to log on to there and be like, oh, what grade 3 student wrote this? You're going to be like, oh.
Grade 4 student.
Grade 4 student, yeah. So I encourage you to listen, read. Another way that I thought making helps us grow as non-economic beings is that it allows us to be defined by what we create and not by what we consume. And a lot of people are defined by their jobs and like what they create. They're like, oh, I am really into photography. That's who I am. But I feel like being defined by your passions is much nicer than being defined by this is my aesthetic. This is all of the movies that I consume, all of the music I consume, and in building your identity based on what other people create, but creating your identity based on what you create.
I agree completely.
Yeah.
Because I think that we are what we do rather than we are what we watch or listen or dress.
Yeah.
And one thing I wanted to just mention, we probably should have said at the start, we're using this definition of make and creation as incredibly broad. It's kind of every expression of individuality that manifests in some kind of thing.
Yeah, I was thinking one of the things I'm going to talk about later is designing your home, like decorating and dressing yourself. But also, of course, if you're a painter or if you like to talk to friends and facilitate really great conversations, like it can really be anything.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that I think is kind of sad about this overlap between economics and art is that a lot of people only consider themselves an artist if they sell art. And we're kind of all artists, I think, to some degree. And one thing that's been a learning curve for me is to be able to say to myself that I'm a writer, even though I've never published anything, or a painter, even though I've never hung anything in a gallery. I mean, someone, I don't know if you'd be, we're kind of putting a spot on him, but your dad comes to mind, because I don't think he would ever describe himself as an artist, but he seems, but he's very creative, right?
Yeah,
he does
just,
a lot
like,
of things.
Whips together an arbor, like an outdoor piece of furniture, just overnight, and he's like, "Oh yeah, just made that for you." Like he made one for our wedding, literally in 2 days. Yeah, and it's like that is the most insane form of artistry I've seen. It's just in him.
Yeah, real artists have that kind of understated, I think. It's just what they do.
Yeah, I always find it funny because I still am at the point where I wouldn't consider myself a podcaster because it's like, this isn't my job.
Exactly.
But it's like we were talking about it the other day, and we were like, we've put like 120 hours on the air, like of recording. And that's not enough that I would consider myself a podcaster. But to the average person, they'd be like, what else are you then? Like what would you call yourself?
I find it helps when you preface it with an adjective. So it's like, I'm a writer. I'm comfortable with saying that because I can say to myself, well, I'm just a bad writer. It's like, I'm not Shakespeare. I'm not like that kind of writer, but I have the same profession. I have the same title. And that's enough. Like, we're just kind of bad podcasters. Yeah. So the people listening are just nodding their heads right now.
Like, amen. Yes. Retweet. I had 2 more things for this point because I thought it was a really interesting question. Okay. And the other one is that it allows us to be like unplugged from trends. Like I find creative people are people who make for like a little bit more than the average person. They have to unplug from trends and like the cycle of things that are going on in the news, but also in the economy of like things to purchase in order to find their voice or their style. Because if you're constantly consuming products and media that are predetermined basically on like what they're going to be showing, you're going to have a really hard time finding your voice. You're just going to be basically mimicking things, which isn't bad in the beginning, but I think you really need to step back, step outside of the picture in order to create your own interpretation of it.
I agree. I do think it's maybe a little bit different now that the wave, the culture, the zeitgeist can be defined as pretty much everything. So for instance, if you were a budding filmmaker right now, to watch the movies that we're in wouldn't just be all the new movies because there's all these different historical genres which are easily accessible and to a degree popular. And it's the same with music, right? Like TikTok's always pulling from like classic rock and things like that. So there is an element of that culture flattening being good for an artist, but I completely understand what you're saying. Yeah. Another point I had on this topic was the fact that so much beauty today is behind a paywall, which kind of solidifies the idea of art as an economic transaction. So I was thinking about public spaces and the fact that there's so few that are just free to be in without having to buy something or pay for a membership. Just being inside public buildings where there might be murals or back in the day frescoes or stained glass windows in churches, all this kind of beauty and aesthetics is gated from a lot of people by class, which is not a good thing.
Yeah, of course not. Because we need inspiration that we are interested in. You can't be like, oh, the only form of inspiration I have access to is movies, but I don't really like movies. What if your thing is architecture, as you said, or historic paintings, which you can only see in museums? Yeah, that feels really true. Another thing that's like kind of behind a paywall to me, I feel like, is the literal supplies.
Oh,
Like
yeah.
think I have this deep-rooted pottery passion within me, but I've really never made anything, like thrown anything on a wheel or whatever. Because it's like, that's just, even for one class is too expensive for me right now. And I feel like in the solo scene, we would have these spaces where we can work together, share the tools, but for like a really either no fee or a really accessible fee.
Part of your library membership or something like that.
Exactly.
I agree. I guess this question's been in my head about art and economics a little bit because of the Oscar nominations that just came out. Also, just a little spoiler for the future, we were thinking about doing a whole episode where we review the Oscars whenever that happens. So we have a lot of movies to watch. But every year it's like there's a big discussion about blockbusters and whether they deserve to be nominated. And there's two different camps. And I just think it's really important to define the line between art and products, which has been blurred a lot over the last like 50 years of late stage capitalism, especially when it comes to media corporations.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, you can't really call Spider-Man anything but a product. It was researched, it was developed, it was sold. Whereas I feel like a movie like, we'll say Parasite from a few years ago, it was like conceptualized, it was fabricated, it was brought together and presented to the public. I feel like those are different adjectives. Exact same product, like a award-winning movie, but different.
You said it, not me.
Different brain power going in.
I don't want all the spiders coming after me, so I don't want to criticize anything. Also, I think when you said adjectives, you might have meant verbs, but...
Verbs. Yes,
Who knows?
You're the writer, not me.
We also had two fun questions that we wanted to answer for this episode. So the first is, where is your ideal creative pilgrimage?
Okay.
So you go first.
So I thought I would start by saying what my creative things are, like what I would kind of call myself.
That's a good idea.
In air quotes, so people aren't confused. I like to create clothing, be it crocheting or sewing or embroidering. I love to bake. You can't stop me from baking, even if we don't need any more muffins. And photography is something that I'm really passionate about. That's one of those things which has just always been in me. Like, I remember for probably 10 years in a row, I asked for some kind of like photography tool for Christmas. But I didn't realize that trend until I was like 20, probably, when I asked for like a camera. Finally, I was like, I want like a nice camera that isn't these other things that I had always been like really hoping for. And then when I got it, I literally cried on Christmas morning. My parents were like, are you okay? And I was like, this is the most wonderful thing ever. That's when I realized I was like, I think I'm a photographer at heart. And I've never worked professionally as a photographer, but I love it and have done it for years and years. I used to make movies when I was a kid with my friends, direct them, write the scripts and everything.
You have any you could mention?
There's The Wizard of Oz. There was Sunday School Musical. There were always comedies because I guess...
even when you weren't trying.
Even when I wasn't trying. Anyway, those are my things. And then obviously podcasting. But my creative pilgrimage, despite those being my things, is to go to Cannes Film Festival.
Oh, yeah.
Because I think I can say this pretty definitely. Even more than nature, I think films inspire me to create.
Okay.
They're what inspire how I dress. They're what inspire how I behave, how I frame shots when I take pictures, and probably how I speak is almost 100% from films. And that's why I feel like going to Cannes and going on the red carpet and being in one of those rooms when like Tarantino walks in or someone walks in and like sits down in front of you or someone gives a speech, I feel like that would be just a life-changing experience, even if I was just there as like a sweeper, someone sweeping the red carpet.
Yeah.
I think it'd be wonderful.
Being part of a 6-minute standing ovation.
Yeah.
You always hear about that. It's like, oh, this movie got an 11-minute standing ovation. I'm like, that must have been awkward though. Who's...
You just gotta keep it going.
Yeah, that's a short film in itself though.
Yeah.
You mentioned that podcasting is a creative endeavor. You think that?
Yeah.
Huh.
Because people talk about YouTube videos as a creative endeavor. You have to write the script, you have to do the framing, you have to conceptualize what the episodes will be about.
Right.
And I feel like that's what we do. We don't write a script, but we put a decent amount of planning in. We coordinate when we will record, and obviously we perform for an hour straight of like talking. And then there's the editing process, and so on.
Real performance.
Yeah.
I think the good conversation is art.
Mm-hmm.
That's what we strive for. I think sometimes we fall short.
Yeah, sometimes I feel like we're just in two separate rooms, but we do our best.
Yeah, we do.
It takes practice. I feel like that's what art is. I'm reading a book called The Art of Loving, and it's like you have to work at it, you have to have intentions, you have to be creative to problem solve, and that's what makes loving an art. So why isn't podcasting an art? What was your answer to the question?
Oh, my ideal creative pilgrimage. I had a few answers. The first that came to mind was Scotland. But I think...
You're obsessed.
I'm obsessed. But here's the thing. I'm obsessed for maybe 2 months of the year, starting this year. Because I know that when the weather gets warm, I'm not going to want to go to Scotland or the UK or old castles or anything like that. But I think I'm just incredibly affected by the seasons. So as soon as those leaves start to fall in the autumn...
Break out the sweaters. You break out the
I just
cups.
become a completely different person.
Yeah.
But what I like about Scotland is the castles and just that real sense of wild nature. I think that, like, untamed, that's very appealing to me.
Yeah.
And another one that I've been thinking of lately is a boat, especially in a warm area. Because I was reading about Jules Verne and how he used to write on a boat. He actually had 2 boats that he would write on. And it wasn't even so much about exploring, although sometimes he would go places on them. It was more about, I guess, just being disconnected like that, which is very cool. And another image with the boats that sticks with me is of that one room that sometimes appears in SpongeBob's house, the library. It's my favorite room in his house.
Yes.
It's only in some episodes. And when you look at his house from the outside, I don't know if it makes sense unless it's underground. But you know what I'm talking about. I just want to have a bunch of books on a boat.
I understand. You once went to Shakespeare's hometown.
Yeah, we both went.
Yes, but I was more of a observer, whereas you were just, I feel like that was almost a creative pilgrimage for you.
It definitely was.
Because the awe in your eyes was just like a child at Disney World. You were like, this is where he sat. This is the window he looked out of. These are the gloves. Like, you were really in a state when we went there.
It was beautiful. My final answer for this question, and the one that I would say is my actual ideal creative pilgrimage, is just Japan. And I'm upset that I didn't think of the Cannes Film Festival either, but I think I'm going to stick with Japan because they just seem like they have a really distinct and, I think, beautiful sense of aesthetics. It's part of the reason why I opened with a haiku, and I have another one for later. And that country just seems like a splendid mix of high-tech cities, which are inspiring in their own way, as well as tradition and nature.
Yeah, I would love to learn about just other countries' art history. We've exclusively learned about the European art history, and not even all of Europe, just like very limited parts of it. So
That's true.
Is a very good idea to expand your horizons. The other fun question is, what's your favorite thing you've made?
My answer is Solacene.
Okay.
Because you said it was creative, so this is the only thing that I've ever made and shared that has gotten, I would say, genuine positive feedback. Yeah. Especially from complete strangers and from strangers in other parts of the world. And it makes my day every time we get a comment like that. So
every time we get an email, we both talk about it probably for hours. I'm just like, can you believe it? Someone's listening. My friend said to me the other day, she's like, oh, I listened to this episode and this was the organism of the week. And I was like, you listened and you like heard? You didn't just like play it? It was mind-blowing to me. And yes, I agree. I was going to pick this, but then I thought perhaps you might pick it. So
you thought perhaps. I know you snooping in my notes.
No, I wasn't
you were snooping in my notes. I've seen you do it.
I don't snoop.
What I like about Solacene, aside from just reaching out to other people that it does, is that it helps me, it helps us improve as speakers. It helps my articulation, which I've always kind of wanted to improve at. Keeps me preparing and professional. It's an exercise in consistency. It keeps us learning in the different topics, and especially post-university, I think it's actually been a kind of important structure in my life. So, yeah.
Yeah, for sure. For things that I've made, I was thinking through it, and besides Solacene, there isn't much that I'm like proud of that I make, because every time you make something, you're super critical of it.
And every time you make something, I eat it.
You do tend to eat it. So I was going through all of like my highlights of like baking endeavors, but then I thought, no, probably not that. And for some reason, these pictures that I took a couple years ago kept coming to my mind, And they haven't like received feedback or anything. I just kind of took them. But I will explain why these are my favorite pictures. I was just in bed. I was like working just like a kind of boring job as a tour guide. And I had this idea and I was like, there's these costumes that are just like stored away at my workplace. And it was like a super quiet season because it was COVID. And I was like, what if I dress up this one girl, go down below deck on the ship that we worked on, and got a shot with the lighting coming through the porthole. And like it was like super specific in this like idea came to me all at once. And it's like usually when those things happen, it's like you're dreaming and then you wake up and you're like, oh, that was just a really bad idea. But then I went to work the next day and asked her, I was like, can I take this picture of you? And she's like, yeah, sure. We went down below and literally I got like one shot because we had to kind of rush. It was just like for work and it ended up being used, fortunately, for a good purpose of like promotion. But I took the picture and it was like one of my favorite pictures I've ever taken. Like the lighting like is shining on one side of her face. The costume worked super well. And just, I don't know. It was like my favorite picture I've taken. And then other than that, something that I made recently that was your idea to make, but I was really happy with the execution, was that we made a duvet cover out of 2 sheets. And for some reason, making that, I was like, it's super useful. I made it in a way that was durable. Usually things that I make, I'm like, they're a little shoddy because I'm still learning how to sew and everything. But I was really proud of that. It turned out exactly how I imagined it. Put little ties on the top to tie the duvet into the cover. And it was just really creative because duvet covers are expensive. And you were like, just use 2 sheets that we don't use.
That's when my cheapness results in an actual good creative endeavor.
Yeah, and I think that's one of my favorite things I've made because it's like, we use it every day.
Yeah. If the listeners want to see that photo you're talking about, maybe they can check it out on the Solar Scene Instagram.
Yeah, I'll put it on the story there. And maybe I'll send a picture to Instagram because that's how you post, right? You send it in of the duvet cover.
Yeah, that's kind of weird, but...
Yeah, just a really up close. They're like, what's this? I was like, it's a duvet cover. Yeah.
Okay, the next question that we wanted to talk about is, how does making change the way we practice taking? Or to use the popular lexicon, how does creation change the way we consume? So as a writer, a bad writer, I use that as my context, and I thought of the ways that reading is different when I'm writing or involved in a project compared to when I'm not, because I think like all artists, like all makers, however passionate you are about a medium, sometimes you want to do it and sometimes you just don't, and you kind of go through phases. So the differences that I thought of is that when I'm writing, I read in a way which is actively trying to learn the form, which results in seeking out better authors than when I'm not writing. Can you relate to that?
Yeah, I certainly can. Even from like the literature point of view, I stopped reading a lot of fiction because I just, for the podcast and life, needed more nonfiction. And it's like I used to just kind of read whatever was popular and the stories that were the most engaging, but they weren't, to me, like this is definitely really personal, like doing anything for me the way that I find nonfiction does. And it also translates to like everything else. The way that I consume is either in a way that I'm seeking intentionally something inspiring or something instructional. So like you'll consume YouTube videos that are literally teaching you how to do something, or even if it's like a vlog or a memoir that you're reading it kind of for instruction or like guidance, I find. Another way that I kind of thought it changes the way that we consume is that it encourages critical consumption. So not just like critiquing movies and such, which is kind of obvious, but it also encourages you to critique the process of things. Like when you knit or when you crochet, you think about, okay, I need to get my yarn, need to pick a pattern, need to make it. It's going to take me like months to make this one thing. So then even when you then go to the store and buy a pre-made meal or you buy clothes or whatever, you think, how is this $2? If the resources had to be sourced, the people had to be hired to market it, to create it, and so on. It makes you a little more critical of those things. Yeah. Some would say a lot more critical.
Well, I took it as like a two-sided thing, because knowing more about something, it makes you more appreciative of the artistry and the process that went into it, whereas otherwise people might kind of look over that. So you say like there's the $2 thing, and you're saying, how is this so cheap? Let's say it's like a handmade hat, which someone's selling for like, I don't know, $50 on Etsy. And most people will be like, oh, how are they charging that much? But you who have made hats now are like, Well, actually, it takes a lot.
Yeah.
So you have that kind of empathy for them. And another example I had is, it seems like there's this brotherhood of and sisterhood of comedians where they all kind of relate to each other, where that, like, they all have stories about when they are in the audience of a different stand-up comic, they will be deliberately laughing because they know what it feels like to be on the stage. It's kind of like that.
Yeah.
But I also thought that, yeah, sometimes it makes you more critical. Like, since I started learning about movies and screenplays, you start to realize how formulaic most of them are.
Yeah. But you also, I feel like it's funny how, like, okay, you're into movies and writing, but when you read a book or when you consume a piece of art, you're probably also thinking of the process of those things, even if those aren't what you are engaged in, if that makes sense.
Yeah, sometimes.
How it kind of translates across. It just kind of makes you more aware in a lot of facets of life, not just that one specific part of life.
That's true. On this subject of kind of your relationship to the creator of the other thing changing, there was this quote from a movie review I read that always stuck with me, which said, "The best directors either make me think that I could never do that, or wow, I could do that." And I was like, yeah, that's kind of, and both of them are good. I just thought that was kind of a funny way of putting it. Another difference I thought of is that when you are actively making something, it just makes you look at the world and not just other pieces of art in a different way. And I would say with wider eyes, less preconceptions. And part of the reason for this, I think, is because anything can be inspiration, especially if you're, be it visual or narrative or, oh, that smells cool, I kind of want to cook with something like that. I don't really know how chefs work, but an example of this I had is Stanley Kubrick, the film director, and there's a lot of famous stories about how he just would read and watch and talk to everything and everybody because he really had no preferences or no discrimination about what he was taking in. Because when you take in such a wide range of themes and news and, I don't know, gossip, like celebrities, industry, technology, different mediums, history, everything, I think that ultimately is helping us learn, helping us grow. And in the creative element, then you can combine those things in new ways. So
yeah. The only other thing that I had for this question was that I feel like how it changes the way that we practice taking is that you either are in one of two camps. If you start, like, you have a passion, I feel like that kind of consumes you. If you're truly passionate about it, like, you're going to be doing it way more than you would anything else.
It's the Tarantino archetype, right?
Yes.
Just watching 3 movies a day.
Yeah, so you're either going to start watching 3 movies a day or start reading 100 books a year or whatever. Or if it's something different, like if it's woodworking, something a bit more physical, you might just consume less because you have way more time that you're spending on these projects. You're spending 3 hours a day on these projects, so you're not going to have time to go to the store and just, like, browse Netflix or what have you.
I agree. It's not even about logistics. I think it's just 2 different personality types. They can both be as creative. Like, there are filmmakers as prolific and as high quality and as renowned as Tarantino who famously don't really like watching movies. Like, that's just a thing. I remember I was watching this director's roundtable once, and I think it was Angelina Jolie. They asked her, like, oh, what kind of music do you listen to on set? And she said, when I'm in the process, so that's like from script to post-production, I can't listen to any music because it just completely takes over. It distracts me like that. So there can definitely be something to a clear mind, allowing you to focus better on your own stuff. It's a good place for my second haiku of the day. You ready?
I'm ready.
So it's, great your loyalty, non-judgmental canvas, how you give me purpose.
Ooh, I really like that.
This was more about the idea of ego and the fact that even if you're a really bad painter or a really bad writer, the good thing is that if it's just for you, the paper's always going to be there. Yeah. It's not going to leave if you besmirch it.
Yeah. I was reading about the literal, like, physical and psychological benefits of creating, and there was this anecdote about this girl who she was just super stressed in high school or whatever, and she colored just a piece of paper completely black. Have you ever done that?
No.
I have. There have been times where I'm like, do you know what I need to do? It's color this piece of paper in. Because it's like, but then at the end, she, like, did that, but then she's like, well, that's bleak. That's, like, how I'm feeling. But then she, like, looked around all her other art supplies and she was like, oh, I'm going to make some flowers out of clay. It's like, the black feeling is like spring. Like, it's dark at the beginning, but then you kind of have to hold on for the flowers to actually bloom. And there's just something innate about a blank canvas that it's like, yeah, as you said, even if you're not a painter, like having an opportunity, having a blank notebook or having a chunk of time where you can just consume some really lovely music or movies.
Yeah.
That helps you keep going and helps you like expand your capacity to handle kind of the gross parts of life.
No, I agree with that. That's something I've been experiencing since we moved to Montreal. I've mostly been cooking for us. And this is like, I've never really cooked in my life before regularly.
Yeah.
And I thought, like, I kept kind of warning you before we moved here. I was like, oh, just be ready because my cooking will be awful. And I'm very kind of utilitarian with it. I won't bother with any kind of flavor. I think that's the word, flavor. I don't think it's pure nutrition. It's just going to be nutrition paste. But then as I started actually cooking, I was like, no, this is kind of, dare I say it, enjoyable. It's a kind of creative outlet. And I like the idea of, I mean, I went full house husband and made a little meal plan,
We do have a meal
which we have on the wall. And I like the idea of filling it every week, especially with sometimes new things, because it's kind of like a blank canvas.
Yeah, a new ingredient or a completely new meal. And I'm very proud of you for this change because I used to do a lot of the cooking when we were in university. You'd come over for supper a lot. Then sometimes I'd come over to your place for supper and it would be an emotional experience.
I'd try.
You tried, I know. But you've gotten really good at cooking. And speaking of cooking, do you know what the organism of the week is?
Bugs.
No.
Okay.
So there's this plant that I didn't know existed until moving to Montreal. And it's not native to Montreal or anything. It's just I didn't know it existed until I moved here because I saw it in someone's house. But it's called a calamondin.
Okay.
And it is a cross between a mandarin orange and a kumquat. And they're these little tiny orange trees that people just have in their houses. And there's some in cafes. And they were originally crossbred in China and then brought over to North America in like 1900, around then. And they can grow 10 to 12 feet tall, but a lot of people just have them in little pots in their houses. I drew an image for you to describe, but it's pretty simple.
This is the new thing we do for Organism of the Week.
We draw it, yes.
Well, my first note is that you spent about as much time on the pot as you did on the plant that's actually in it. So
it's true.
I'll try to ignore that. It's a nice pot though.
Thank you.
It has brown...
Colored it with markers, but yes, a brown trunk.
Brown trunk, brown soil, orange circles springing off it, as well as green petals.
But it's in a pot. That's like the main...
Yes, it's in a pot. Okay.
The main point. Because a lot of fruit trees are often just in fields. But these are often in pots because they're ornamental, but they also, you can eat the little kumquat things, and they're really, really sour though.
It's probably because they don't survive in Montreal. That's probably why they're in the pots.
The thing with these that I find really cool is that they probably wouldn't survive in Montreal, but they do survive in a lot of cold climates. And a lot of fruit, especially citrus, you couldn't grow anywhere north of like Florida.
Have you tried one and it's not good?
I thought it was nice. I had one off of this person's tree, but it was very sour. Like it's like a lemon or a lime.
Right.
They're usually used in drinks or cooking, or you make marmalade out of them. And they're shade and drought tolerant. They seem really hardy to me. Like, and the fruits, my favorite part about them is that they're really small. Like they're the size of like a lime. And I just think they're really, really cool looking. Because we never have like fruit trees in our houses. We have just greenery. So I think if we ever get a new plant, this is what I want.
Well, shout out to the, what's it called?
Calamondin tree.
To the calamondin.
Yes.
Come on the show.
Yeah. Sponsor us.
We just have 3 cameras and one of them is one of them is set on the tree.
We just cut to it. Thoughts?
That could be a gimmick. Also, we're going to start recording the podcast on video.
Yeah, we're recording right now with this. We'll never see the light of day. Hopefully.
Okay, something else I wanted to mention, I don't know where it fits, is that I've been reading this book called Paris in the 20th Century by Jules Verne. And I just found it in the library without having heard of it. And it was something which he wrote in the 1800s, which his editor basically said, no, I'm not publishing this. This will never sell. This is too outlandish, which is really funny. And then it was discovered in the 1900s, and they were like, oh, this is actually fairly prescient, because it's this world, it's Paris, 100 years after Jules Verne's life, where he predicted it as being everything economic, everything numbers, and all forms of poetry or artistry shunned and mocked because they didn't contribute to one's economic value. And I was like, we're not far away from that. But I do have the feeling that maybe every generation thinks that things are going bad in that direction. I don't think it's ever been easy to be creative, I'll put it like that. This might actually be one of the easier times to be creative.
Yeah, I feel like there's this low-key false sense of security as a creative person of like, it seems like everyone can make a living on the internet doing something creative, which I think is valid, but also to do that, you have to put in so many hours of like marketing and networking and things that like aren't actually the creating.
Yeah, people might think that all it would take is the skill of painting, which is maybe not the case anymore. Final question of the day is, how does making change our minds and therefore change the world?
We kind of talked about it earlier, but like we look for creativity and inspiration in everything, I find, when we are making.
Yeah.
And I feel like that lends to less negativity, perhaps. Because it's like if you're having a conversation with someone and instead of being like griping about their personality or how they articulate their words or whatever, you're just looking for the good in them, or you are walking through a kind of dingy street, but instead of being like, oh, so gross, you're like, it's inspiring you instead to perhaps pick up the garbage or beautify it in some way.
My point on that was that it just generally helps hone our aesthetic senses so that we try and beautify the world, as you mentioned. And also we all get better at imagining. It's like art is kind of this collective exercise of imagination. When you go into an art gallery, it's like a conveyor belt of people walking through, staring at the painting, especially if it's an abstract one, getting into it, and then moving on to the next. And that's something, and then hopefully coming out of the museum slightly changed, which I think is great. And so was Sini.
Yeah, I feel like right now all of us just operate in our heads, like almost exclusively. We go through life and we just have a bunch of thoughts, or we have a bunch of images shown to us, but we don't operate very much in like our physical bodies. So as you begin to create in whatever way it manifests, if you're decorating your home or whatever, you're getting into your physical body. And as you said, you're going to be more inclined to create spaces that are functional and beautiful and conducive to well-being, instead of just, if we're always in our head, we don't actually spend the time to think, oh, my house is really like depressing. Like it really has a negative impact on my mood. And even people who come here, they're not leaving inspired. So I feel like it encourages beautification. And it's like, obviously not everyone has the money to beautify their home, but it could just be how things are laid out.
Yeah.
Or how you, maintain it. And along the same lines of like the physical and versus like mental existence, I feel like as we spend more time in our physical bodies, it lends better to more mental clarity. Because when everything's going on in our heads and there's really no outlet, like you're spending no time actually putting your ideas onto paper, even if you're really bad at it, journaling is just like such a powerful tool for mental clarity because you're putting it out into the world. Yeah. It's like you could type it on your phone, you could text it to someone, but it's like etching it into paper just actually creates mental space. And this isn't just like my idea, like it is a thing.
Yeah, I was looking into the science of creation a little bit, and it's just across the board, people say, well, this is really good for your brain. Even if you're making like, I don't know, heavy metal music. Like there is no form of music that is bad for your brain to be making, as long as it's music and as long as it's a creative exercise for you. So making increases the functional connectivity in our brain, as well as the activation of the visual cortex. Less stress, better self-esteem, self-understanding, and self-knowledge. And my takeaway from that is that a world where people confront their pain and fear, especially fear of the future, on a canvas rather than with each other through politics or just through fights about who was next in line in the grocery store, is a good world. And the other thing about making art is that not only is it healthy, but it's also eminently sustainable, because really the only realistic downside to making too much music is that you get really good at it. And that's just not a bad thing.
Yeah, exactly. I feel like the sustainability issue of culture and of environment can exclusively be solved through creative endeavors. We're not going to just like all of a sudden a plant is going to open up with a note that says this is the answer. It's going to take people having ideas in a ton of different areas. It's not going to be just one person who works as an architect. I've solved climate change, or I've solved the mental health crisis. It's going to be a bunch of people doing their own little things, and then the change will come sprout from there, like bean sprouts we've been talking about. You have to be the sprout.
Another term that I learned was embodied cognition. Do you know what that is?
Sort of. You can explain it though.
So embodied cognition is basically when you're reading about someone on a beach, and through the imagery and the text, as well as through your own effort as a reader, you start to smell the ocean, feel the sand, feel the sun, hear the waves. Embodied cognition, like you're putting yourself in the scene. And that concept struck me. Of course, we all know about that intuitively because we start reading from a young age usually. But because of all the corporate talk and studio talk, which I guess is corporate these days, of immersion, increased immersion through VR, through better screens, through bigger screens, all these new technologies. And it's like immersion and imagination are kind of contrasting things. It's almost as if the more immersed you are in the art, the less your imagination has to work. And this is why I think reading's so good for you, and also music's so good for you, because it's a little bit more abstract. So you kind of grow your analytical skills as well as your imagination, which is always good. I had this quote from Picasso, which is, "Art washes from the soul the dust of everyday life." Cleanses us. Yeah. And visual art, I think, is especially good, even though I'm not much of a painter or a drawer, because it allows us to be, it's like it allows us to be at once more abstract and also more concrete. Because I know, like in art therapy, it's usually visual art that's used rather than say, write me a poem. They would say, paint me a picture of how you're feeling, because well, because we usually think and talk in language. So when it comes to actually expressing the true emotions, which are deep down, that might not be the best avenue.
Yeah, for sure. My final thought for this question of how making changes our minds and therefore the earth is kind of like unrelated to what we were saying, but it's my final thought that I had. And it teaches us that we can't be masters of everything, that you need teams to make things happen. Because I feel like we feel that we have to be masters of everything. If you want to start a YouTube channel, you have to know every single tiny thing that exists. And it's like, we have to start being content with, okay, my thing is podcasting. My thing isn't perhaps marketing.
It teaches you your limitations.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree.
And encourages, therefore, community and collaboration. And I feel like that's how it can kind of change the world, because as you create and begin to gain confidence in a field, or a few, like you can have a few things that you're good at, you then will realize, okay, I want to start a business, or okay, I want to put this in an art gallery. I'm not going to build the art gallery. I need to rely on someone else who that's their calling is curation, or whatever it is. And I think that's really powerful in creating the Solacene, is working together, being comfortable just saying, I'm going to get good at my things, you get good at your things, and then we'll come together and work on a bigger social project.
Well said. I think it's a good way to close the episode.
Yeah.
If you all want to check out the blog, the link is in the description. Again, I don't remember the name of it. It's Solacene at some blogging website. You can also buy our zine. Even though we finished the degrowth series, we're still making and selling them. So check that out and have a nice day.